Hi everyone, and warm welcome to this second webinar in this learning series of tools for circular business growth. These tools can be used when you guide and advise companies on how they can apply circular business model principles for growth purposes. The webinars are organized in a collaboration with the Nordic Innovation, Sitra, and Accenture, and are based on the Nordic Circular Economy Playbook and Toolkit, which is a digital toolkit for companies to transition to circular business models. And you can find a link to this toolkit in the chat. My name is Sofia Forsberg, and I'm part of the Accenture Sustainability Strategy team in the Nordics. And I'm going to be the moderator in this session and looking forward in taking you through the next hour together with my colleagues. So the session will be recorded and can be found on Nordic Innovation's website after the session. Here on the screen, you can see the team working on the project, both from Nordic Innovation and Accenture. And today's speakers are Anna Tundevold, who is our Nordic Sustainability Strategy Lead at Accenture, and Hanna Karlberg, who is a circular economy expert and working with technology, innovation, and sustainability at Accenture. So if we move to the next slide. Today, I will start by introducing you to the Nordic Circular Economy Playbook, which is the framework and background for these webinars. And then I will hand over to Anna Tundevold, who will introduce you to the concept, framework, and thinking behind the circular capabilities that can enable circular business models. After that, Hanna Karlberg will take you through step-by-step hands-on exercises on how you can support other organizations or your own organization in using these capability framework and assessing organizations' capability gap. Anna will then introduce you to technologies that can enable circular business models and what aspect to consider when introducing new technologies into an organization. And then Hanna will take you through the exercises on how you can support other organizations in assessing technology gap. And at the end of the session, we will have a Q&A. So please be active and write your questions in the chat along the way, and we will try to answer as many as possible by the end. So if you go to the next slide. The methodology and tools used in the webinars are based on the Nordic Circular Economy Playbook. And the playbook combines circular methodology and know-how, practical example, as well as applied tools and framework. And the playbook follows a 5-step approach, and each chapter addresses 1 step each. And we started 2 weeks ago with step 1 and 2, where we presented how to define a circular vision for a company and how to identify and assess what opportunities and business models that are applicable and how to identify what value they can capture. And this webinar was recorded and can be found in the link posted in the chat. And today we will move on to how to assess what capabilities and technologies that are required for the identified circular opportunities by helping organizations looking at what kind of technologies and capabilities that they have today and where the gaps are. And finally, next week, the 8th of June, we will present how to define a roadmap. And we know that there are a lot of barriers for employing circular economy. So it's important to identify these and address them in a roadmap to how they can be overcome. And by the end of this webinar, you will have the tools to support organizations in identifying and assessing needed capabilities and technologies for their identified circular business opportunities. And with this, I would like to hand over to our next speaker, Anna Tundevold, our Nordic Sustainability Strategy Lead at Accenture, who is one of the authors of the playbook. So if you have any questions regarding the playbook or the framework, don't hesitate in writing them in the chat. So warm welcome, Anna.
Thank you, Sophia, and thank you for that introduction. So happy to walk you through this next chapter, looking into what capabilities are required for circular businesses. And I think this capability section is really fundamental part of the workshop series and also the playbook. And I would almost say that if companies are able to advance, integrate circular capabilities, almost half is already won. I think this is one of the most fundamental pieces to succeed as a circular business. So entering this part of the playbook here, I really urge you as facilitators and trainers to really emphasize that it's critical that circular economy is not managed by a siloed circular organization, but rather that these capabilities are really integrated into the business. And I'll go back to this point over and over again across this chapter. So circular capabilities takes the usage or the capability that is needed across the full value chain. And Hannah will shortly introduce you to the tools and the exercise for this chapter, but here's a high-level introduction. You can also refer to the fundamental section and the playbook for more details. But so in general, there are 3 distinctive categories for the circular economy. It's customer value delivery, resource handling, organization, and collaboration. So in short, customer value delivery is really about ensuring a more long-term perspective when considering customer engagement and product ownership. We need to shift from having a one-off interaction at the point of sale towards having and ensuring a continuous relationship across the full life cycle of a product to offer add-on services, take back programs, etc. And this is really to ensure that we maximize the life cycle and the length of a product to ensure that we can take care of a product after it's reached its full potential. So customer value delivery is really critical to ensure this long-term perspective. Then resource handling. This goes across the entire value chain, from the way we produce to the way we use and to the way we dispose products and materials. So here in a circular economy, in contrast to the linear model, we really need to start shifting from only handling the direct material that goes into a product, but also now value and encompasses also indirect material use and ensure that we address underutilized capacities and waste generation. So really thinking more holistically of resources and ensuring that we also value waste. The third category is around organization and collaboration, and a circular model really redefines how a company realizes value. And in order for this to be a successful transformation, it's really critical that we have new steering mechanisms, targets, and incentives in order to drive this change across the organization. And here, again, integration is really key. It needs to be embedded in every function: design, sourcing, production, sales. Each of these functions requires new targets, new steerings, new incentives in order to ensure that they can successfully start building new capabilities. And here the chain is really only as strong as its weakest link. So collaboration is key, both internally and externally. So if we go to the next slide, let me further elaborate on some of the more capabilities that is required and trying to be a little bit more specific. So from a customer value delivery, so those are here the light blue capabilities. Key capabilities here is ensuring that we start designing for outcomes, allowing the design organization to really put the customer needs and requirements at the center of the product design. This means that we need to start co-designing and integrating the customer and the user as part of that design experience. But also ensuring that we design from a circularity perspective, so that we start applying design principles that ensure long life cycles, that we start using material that are recyclable. So these needs to be embedded already at the design. This will set the fundamental for the rest of the life cycle. And then finally, more at the use phase of a product, it's when we start selling selling products. So here the sales organization is really fundamental to ensure that products are used in a circular way. And that means start to sell outcomes rather than products. So shifting from a one-off sale, as I mentioned before, and really now start engaging with customer across the life cycle. And this is a fundamental shift in the sales organization, and typically also contradicts perhaps existing sales target, which is focused on maximizing one-off sales, to here more towards ensuring that long-term relationship and rather measuring add-on sales and services to help customers prolong the life cycle. Then we have resource handling. So as mentioned, again, it goes across the full value chain. So some examples are capabilities within sourcing. Here we need capabilities that can source materials that can easily be regenerated, or even access new types of materials such as recycled material or waste databases. In production, here we need to enable our production people to really manage waste in production, ensure that we can manage waste flows, material flows, but also upskill them to make sure that not only producing new products, but also remanufacturing and maintaining old products. And then take back. This is a new capability. So here we need to establish capabilities for return system to make sure that we can facilitate that end of life maintenance and management. And then finally, we have organization and collaboration. So here we really need to transform culture and steering. We need to develop and motivate circular competences and outcomes. So this is really requires capabilities at leadership level to set that vision and to ensure that this is clearly understood and motivated by the colleagues at all levels. Then orchestrating an ecosystem, being able to manage increasing number of ecosystem partners and collaborate and maximize strength and sharing value proposition might sound easier than what it actually is, requiring much more transparency and sharing. And ultimately deploying technologies and data intelligence. And then we're seeing a huge shift in this right now as companies are really building analytics and sustainability data capabilities to make sure that they can execute and take decisions on real-time data rather than annual reporting. So here, this is where you need to enable your people and the people that participate in the workshop really to understand the different sets of capabilities required. And if we go to the next slide, I think what we've done is that we change slide, please. Katrina, can you please change the slide? So what I will get to, and hopefully we will manage to fix this, Sophia, maybe you can help. So thank you, perfect. So what we've done is that we started mapping also these capabilities for the different business models. This is by no means a final answer, but I think it gives some rough indication that the different capabilities have varying relevance for the different business models. So if we take one example, which is around designing products for circularity, this will be most relevant for circular business models that address at the beginning of the value chain, for example, circular inputs and sharing platforms. While focusing on sales of outcomes will be more focused on the business models that are centralized during the use phase. So, for example, product as a service or product use extension. So I think this is logical, but I think this is an important point to make, that obviously it's a long list of capabilities and companies really need to think about what to prioritize first. But regardless, and I think this goes back to my first point, regardless, I would say that organization and collaboration is really fundamental regardless of business model. This will set the tone and this will incentivize your employees to really drive the change. So with that said, I would like to hand over to the next speaker, which is Hanna, and I'll probably let Sofia introduce.
Thank you, Anna, for illustrating that there are multiple capabilities that can enable the shift towards the circular business models and how they can be more tangible for the organizations by dividing them into the three main categories. I want to welcome Hanna Karlberg, circular economy expert at Accenture, and she will help you understand how to use exercises from the Playbook Toolkit to help organizations find the capabilities that can enable their specific circular business model. And Hanna has a lot of experience of being a facilitator of these exercises. So for different kinds of organizations. So if you have any questions regarding that, please post them in the chat. So over to you, Hanna.
Thank you so much for the nice introduction. Yeah, I think we can move on to the next slide actually. So what we will do today is that we will actually use or follow the same case example as we did last time. So just as a quick recap and reminder to ourselves, the company that we think about now in all these examples, that is a large truck manufacturer that provides transport solutions in the medium to heavy duty segment, selling trucks, buses, and truck components to business customers. And if we move on to the next slide, the first step here is then basically a homework summary where all the participants are asked to share their top ideas with the rest of the group, and then also try to consider 1 to perhaps 3 other participants who they would like to team up with. Because the purpose of this first exercise is both to share the idea so everybody can hear and get inspired from each other, but also to form groups where we have different kind of players. So it could be one manufacturing company, for example, it could be one recycler, one more knowledge hub or something, but we have some different players getting together in groups. But just to be super clear, the task is then that the participants, for their top ideas, summarizes the completed parts of the business model canvas. And to do that, we usually have used sticky notes because that's quite convenient and that also creates a kind of nice atmosphere. And then we also have a big whiteboard where we paint this business model canvas. And then it is the parts that we went through during the last session. So they start off with a vision, then go on to the market, customers, relationships, channels, and competitors. Then also on a high level, summarize the offering and the financial aspects. And then they, as I mentioned, present this to the full group and try to also state what kind of a circular business model that the idea relates to. And then as the final step, and here it usually requires quite some help from the facilitators, but there we try to form groups around the ideas. As I said, so we have different kind of companies or organizations with different kind of perspectives coming together in those groups that we will then also have during the rest of this workshop. The timings, of course, and I think I mentioned that quite a few times last time as well, but those are really indicative and they need to be, of course, tailored depending on the cohort, but it's a good guideline at least. And I think we can move on to the next slide, and that is just to make it super clear. So this is for our case example. This is the summary of their homework. So you can see that they've populated those blue fields here. And their vision or value statement is to bring more sustainable and recyclable materials into the company's product offerings. And the key idea that they will, or we will focus on here today is related to circular packaging, which could be then increasing the usage of recycled material in the packaging, as well as designing the packaging to maximize fill rates and recovery of materials. So that is a reminder of last time. And then if we move on to the next slide, we will now go into the circular capabilities. And in fact, what we do here is that we ask ourselves 3 key questions to assess the capabilities inside and outside of the organization. The first one is then to answer what the key capabilities are to mature in order to succeed in circularity, and also what initiatives need to be initiated. The second part is then related to activities to close gaps to where we want to be, basically. So then the question is, what are the key actions required to execute on those initiatives? And the third one is related to collaboration and who are actually the key ecosystem partners that you need to collaborate with. So this is something that we now will try to answer during the next coming slides or exercises. Thank you. So we will basically go through 3 steps to help you assess the capabilities and identify actions to develop them further across the ecosystem. The first step, and I will soon go through the different steps, so don't worry if you can't see the details here. But the first step is to assess the target and current state, as I mentioned, and then to prioritize the capabilities. And then the final step is to ignite ideation through group discussion around leading examples here. And based on this, we will then have a list of activities to close and also to close those gaps, basically. So we can move on to the next slide and the first exercise. So the first thing we will do is to assess and try to understand the target state, but also the current state. So we say, okay, here we are today, this is where we want to go. So then the participants work in those idea teams, the groups that we shape during the sort of homework summary in the first step. And then the first step is to identify what capabilities are required for your selected circular idea. Then the second step is to assess the current maturity level for each relevant capability. And then finally, to define the target state for each relevant capability. And to do this, we have a template, and we also have some supporting materials that relates very much to what Anna said before. If the participants, for example, can't remember everything by heart at this time. So here we have approximately 15 minutes, so it's supposed to be quite quick, quite top of mind. This is something that you, of course, could spend super much time on, but this is supposed to be a quite quick exercise. And if we move on to the next slide, we can then see an example for our studied truck manufacturer here. I won't go through all the different examples, but here you can see that we've marked out which ones are relevant for them, added some comments on the current and target states, and also pinpointed those here in the middle with the X related to the current state and the O relating to the target state. And here, if we take an example, then we can look into the second line, which is design products for circularity. And here, a comment regarding the current state is that the packaging material is not designed for using recycled material as of now. So here they rank their current state quite low, especially in contrast to where they want to go or where they want to be. And a comment or remark regarding the target state is then to design to use less resources for production and to use recycled material in packaging material. So that is one example. I think we can move on to the next exercise, which is then to prioritize those capabilities. Then again, they work in those idea teams with mixed organizations and companies. The first step is then to write down relevant capabilities on sticky notes, and then we try to have one capability per sticky note. Then they are asked to define the strategic importance of each relevant capability to the business model or idea that they have. and then to define the ease of implementation of each relevant capability. I will soon come to the definition of those two as well. The fourth step is to then define which capabilities to develop internally, who should do it, and which ones to outsource perhaps to ecosystem partners. And then finally to select 3 capabilities for a group discussion and write them on sticky notes. So here we have a template that we will soon look at, and the timing is approximately 15 minutes. So again, quite short, and this is something that you could also, of course, spend much more time on and go back to when you get home from this workshop as well. But if we move into the next slide, I think it will add some context for you here. So when we talk about strategic importance to the business model or to the idea in this case, then we mean the extent to which the capability supports long-term or overall aims and provides strategic differentiation potential. So this is the y-axis here. And then we have on the x-axis the ease of implementation, which is basically required system, process, and cultural change compared to level of existing resources and expertise. Basically, what we're trying to say here is it easy or is it hard? How much will it require from us to make it happen? And then we have those sticky notes with the capabilities. And by interpreting this matrix here, we can see that transforming culture and steering has a really high strategic importance and is relatively easy to implement, relatively hard to implement. So that is one example. And then we have in the right-hand side of the slide some capabilities then that are prioritized for internal development, and the other 2 that are prioritized for outsourcing, for example, then to ecosystem partners. I think we can actually move on to the next slide, which is a group discussion, which are usually really flourishing and a good way to also get some other perspectives. So here, each idea group discuss and try to map the top 3 capabilities to different functions. They try to map key needed skills and know-how for the selected capabilities, key risks and challenges related to developing the selected capabilities, and also finally leading examples and success factors on how to develop those capabilities. And here again, we have a group discussion template and also use some sticky notes. And here timing is really dependent on the cohort again, but we would try to have it not too long here as well. And one final comment here on this slide is that we start off in the idea groups and then we go on to discussion in the full group to also learn from the different participants that you're perhaps not discussing most closely with, but that could also be a good way to also cross-collaborate a bit. And if we go to the next slide, perfect, thanks. We have an example of what this could look like. And if we look into the one to the left-hand side, or the first one basically, that is design products for circularity. That is the capability basically. And then we've tried to map the needed skills and know-how on the sticky note underneath of that, and then potential challenges and risks, and the leading examples and potential recommendations. So that is also one way then, of course, to do this. And when it comes to needed skills and know-how, it could be understanding of our environmental impact throughout product life cycles, and also the ability to design products to use sustainable material. When it comes to the challenges or risks, it could be use of multiple material types that could make the design difficult. Maybe you don't know how to do that from start. And then finally, you could consider the whole life cycle in the design process, develop and apply circular design criteria, and so on. If we move on to the next slide, we have the third and final exercise, of this part, and that is to define the activities to close the gaps. So then we go back to the template that we've seen before on the right-hand side, which is basically what's circled here in red on the slide. And then again, they work in those idea teams and try to conclude and list a list of activities that are needed to close the capability gaps, the distance between the X and the O that we saw in the previous slide. And then also try to define a high level responsibility in the organization for who is basically to do this or most reasonable to do this. And as I mentioned, we have the template, and again, the timing is here a bit dependent, of course, on the cohort. This could typically be a bit shorter compared to the previous as well. And if we just look at the next slide, you can see an example of what this template could look like when it's basically finalized. So if we go back to the second row again, which is design products for circularity, then it could be upskilling product designers and hiring people with experience, and that could be basically managed by the design team or HR in this example. But with that, I will hand back over to Anna, I think.
Yes, thank you, Hanna. As you said, I give the word to Anna to introduce the technologies and framework that can support the enablement of the circular business models.
Very good. All right, so I said that capabilities were a fundamental part of enabling the circular economy, and here I will say it again because I think that technology is also really critical here. And in fact, the circular concepts are not new. They've been around for centuries. It's based on the fundamental logic that we should be more efficient and do more with less, which makes economic sense. So the concept has actually been around for centuries, but very much thanks to technology, it's now easier than ever and less costly also to develop circular models. So I'll get back to that in a second. And I think especially we've seen how now availability of data, we've seen increasing automation, connected devices, IoT, but also completely new platforms such as the metaverse. This is now really allowing for the next level of intelligence and truly enabling new customer interactions and business intelligence. So the list of technologies that are relevant for a circular economy is probably endless. It's more than we could fit into one slide. So what we've done here is that we, as usual, just try to simplify. And the simplification that we apply here for the circular economy is to categorize technologies into three buckets, where we have digital, physical, and biological technologies. And this is really to help the users to navigate what type of technologies could be relevant for them as they explore the circular economy. What technologies should they consider to apply really to improve the outcomes of their circular economy work? So if you think about digital technologies, these are technologies that are based on computer, electronics, communication science. These are technologies such as the Internet of Things, artificial intelligence. And these type of technologies, they typically use volume as information that comes from a physical asset. This could be sensors, this could be temperature information. So really creating intelligence that allows for business steering and information. Then we have physical technologies, and these are technologies that interact with the physical environment. Basically, they exist physically. This could be, for example, robotics that automates the production process. This could be carbon capture technologies or nanotechnologies. Yeah, really technologies that exist physically and enables new types of engagements. And then thirdly, biological. So technologies that are based on biological aspects, anything from bio-based materials that we use in the products, for example, using waste as material, or genetic engineering, manipulating the genome through use of biotechnologies and gene-modified soybean or cotton, for example. So thinking about this as a technology as well, because it truly is technology revolutions. So here's just a list of a number of technologies. I'm not going to go through all of them in details, and I think this is just as food for thought as well, but to really now start enabling the users to start thinking about what various type of technologies there are. So if we go to the next slide, similar to what we've done for the capability section, what we try to do here is starting to map these different technologies to the different business models. So here it's important to understand that, basically what technologies could be relevant for the different business models. So if we take sharing platform as an example, what we see here is that really big data has transformed our ability to use sharing platform and do that more effectively. Sharing information easily and sharing data that allows users to interact with each other and understand the performance of the products when they take over that ownership, but also using blockchain, for example, here to ensure that there's transparency and understanding this visibility of the supply chain also. Then I think another good example is product life extension. Here we really see some cool technologies being already applied today, for example, augmented reality, in terms of here reduced maintenance work, as you can allow for more efficient maintenance through using augmented reality, which allows for on the spot training, giving information to people on the ground that can help them be more effective in this work, or using Internet of Things to make sure that you connect with the product and you get maintenance information, life prestanda information, so that basically you can take precautionary actions to ensure that you provide maintenance at the right point of time. So these are just some examples, and as I said, the list is long and there's a lot of opportunities to apply technology. So as we go through the exercises and the frameworks for this, it's really to help the user think about how they can be more smarter as they design their circular business models. So maybe just one final thing before we go into the exercises, and here it's really about helping assess the viability of technologies that could be relevant. So just some pointers when we start reflecting on what technologies to choose. One thing is price. Sometimes we hear that the price is very expensive, or that it's not affordable, especially if you're an SME. But here it's also about entering the market at the right time, as we see that there's also a massive decrease of price over years due to basically the fast development of technology. So also consider what time to enter the market, or what you invest in what period of time. In comparability here, it's important not just to compare technologies in terms of cost, but also really start evaluating them also from if they have the same functionality, compare the benefits of the different technologies, and help that also drive the sort of company prioritization of what technologies to choose. So don't let cost be the only comparable factor. And then the business case, and I guess this goes back to the previous point also, that sometimes it's difficult to basically argue for the cost of a technology, and here I think we need to look at it holistically, because we see, as said, like technology has really enabled the revolution of circular economy because of efficiency and volume gains. So here we really need to think about the full business case, not just the cost, but also thinking about what revenues and savings potential the technology can enable, or what increase in employee efficiency or customer value it will add. So think about the cost and the value holistically is the main point here. And then also the fourth and final aspect, think about also how the scope will impact the cost and the financing of this, not just look at the technology application per se, but also think about how it will apply to the size of the operations or the complexity of the product or the number of processes. And typically we also see that the price or the cost flattens out as the scope increases. These are, I guess, no rocket science that are unique for the circular economy, but really to help the users overcome the burdens that we typically see with applying technologies. Now over to Hanna again.
Yes, thank you. So now we'll go into the final exercises of today, which is then related to assessing the technology gaps and technology maturity to identify actions on how to develop those and further also enable the circular business model that the participants have identified. So then we have 3 key questions that we will try to answer and try to consider during this part of the sessions. The first one is related to identifying the technologies that you actually need. So then the question, of course, is what technologies can be used to support the initiatives? The second part is related to, again, actions to close potential gaps. And then the question is, what are the key actions required to implement these technologies? And the final part is again related to internal versus collaboration. I mean, who are actually the key partners that you need to collaborate with to make this happen? And if we move into the next slide, what we will do here is basically that we will follow 2 steps to assess the technology maturity and identify those actions to help develop that further. And the first step is understanding the target and the current state of where you are now. So this is actually quite similar to what we did before with the capabilities, but now we consider technologies. And the second step is to ignite ideation through group discussion around leading examples, basically to lift where you see the horizon a bit. And then what you will get out of this is a list of activities to close those gaps. If we move to the next slide, we get into the 4th exercise, or the first one for this chapter. And that is, as I mentioned, to assess the target and current state. Again, the participants work in those idea groups that we shaped in the beginning. And I mean, in some cases, we've seen that maybe one participant is better off in another group. They have more synergies there, for example. Then we move them around as well, of course, to make it as good for all the participants as possible. But then when they work in those groups, they are asked to identify what technologies that are relevant for the selected idea, to assess the current maturity level of each of the relevant technologies, to define a target state, and also to select a top 3 technologies for the group discussion, and also write those down on sticky notes. And again, we of course have templates, which we will look into soon, and also some technology descriptions, which relates back to what Anna just mentioned, so the participants can have them as a reminder and also read up on after the workshops. And here we have approximately 1 hour for both individual work and group discussions, but again, the timings could differ depending on the cohort and the needs of the cohort. If we move to the next slide, we will see then an example of this. In this case, it's been marked that RFID, or radio frequency identification, could be a relevant technology. And basically here we see that our current state is that the technology is not used. However, they've started to investigate in this technology. So the current position is quite low or quite novice. And they want to move up a bit on the ladder to at least a basic position. And here a comment is that technology is used in 1 or 2 product categories. And then we can move on to the next slide. And I think in regards of time, I won't go through all of these examples, but here you can see basically that we have new materials, bio-based materials, and digital twin as 3 additional examples of relevant technologies. If we move to the next slide, the next part here is then the group discussion, which is quite similar to what we did in the capability assessment before. So here, the idea group gather once again to discuss and map the top 3 technologies to key functions, key know-how and skills required for those selected technologies, and the top challenges and risks, both to the selected technology, but also its implementation. This could be related to time to market, but also if you want to go for a more standard solution or a more customized solution that has different demands on the input, basically. And also the 4th and final step here is leading examples of implementation of selected technologies. This could be related to cost, time, complexity, and so on. And here's, I think I mentioned, we have a template again, and we use sticky notes. And first we do this in the idea groups, and then we'll have a discussion in the full group. And for all these full group discussions, we typically also encourage the participants to get in front of the other participants, or at least stand up so something happens, so we can keep the energy up a bit as well. Then if we move on to the next slide, we can look into an example of this. So if we look into the example here to the left, which is bio-based materials, then we see that the understanding of how to add biopolymer in products and how it works with other materials, that is something, a skill and know-how that we need to have to make this happen. Then we see that securing know-how, customer expectation management, and also ensuring the quality, that is the potential challenges and risks that are really the key ones here in this example. And then finally, considering the whole life cycle in the material development process is really important here, that we think a bit more end-to-end here, basically. And if we move to the next slide, we go into the final exercise before the homework. And here we go back to the template that we worked in the previous exercise, which is related then to defining activities to close those gaps that we identified. So the participants again work in the same groups as before and conclude a list of activities that are needed to close internal and ecosystem technology gaps. They define high-level responsibilities for each activity and also ecosystem partner. And here, as I mentioned, the same template as before, but now we turn our eyes to the right-hand side, which is this circled red area. And again, quite some time, 40 minutes, but it's usually people think that this time flies by. And if we look into the next slide, we can see an example of what it could look like when we have the entire row filled in. So when we look into new materials, we see that collaboration, or to collaborate with innovation centers to research and hire employees, that is something that we will do to close the gap that they have identified here. And then design, R&D, or HR could be the relevant people in the organization to take this on. But of course, this will need to be refined further on as well. Then if we move to the next slide, we have the final part for this session, which is the homework for the participants. So quite similar to the previous time, the participants are asked to go back to the business model canvas and populate it with extra, or the gained insights, basically. And this time they're asked to focus on the side here, the right-hand side here, which is the operating model, the one that we marked out in blue. And and really to be ready basically to present that in the next session as well. But then of course, if they, based on what they've learned today, see that there is something that they would like to change in the sessions or the sections that we looked into before, that is of course also very good as we get more knowledgeable further we get into this process. So with that, I will hand back over to Sofia.
Thank you so much, Hanna, for walking us through the exercises that can be used to assess and prioritize both the capabilities and technologies for the circular business models. And hopefully some of the listeners have gotten some inspiration on how to bring these exercises to other organizations and back to your own organization. So with this, I would like to move over to the Q&A. And we have received a question in the chat, and I will let you, Hanna, start to answer and elaborate on this question, and maybe Anna have something to add as well. But the question is, how do you have any tips or best practice for how to continue working with the actions and ideas after the workshops are finished?
Yes, I think there's a lot of different tips and tricks, but I think the key thing is basically to get started. Perhaps start with something small and quite concrete to try to define and anchor it into the organization as well. And I think also adding back a bit to what we were discussing in the last session, that we also, if we combine this with a solid value case, that could also make it easier to communicate it within the organization and also to gain buy-in, and then try to work the different key stakeholders in, so you basically get it moving and can basically prove the case of it. And one thing that I would like to add as well is, of course, then that many of the participants who were in the programs before, they've started with pilots, again, adding back a bit to, I mean, starting a bit small and then scaling it instead of trying to do everything perfect from the beginning. Anna, would you like to add something?
I completely agree. And maybe one thing to add is then after you've started doing these exercises and these workshop groups, I would encourage you, as you go back to your business, is also start incorporating other functions and other parts of your business to continue elaborating on the pilot or the idea, because it will require collaboration and you will require to really start thinking about this from a holistic end-to-end value chain perspective. So bring it back and work with your colleagues, but also with your ecosystem partners, and don't be scared to invite your customers to have the conversation with them already.
Thank you both for good answers to that very good question. We have received another question, which is, which audience do you address with these exercises? Managers, executives, product leads? And I'm addressing this question to you, Hanna, as well to start.
Yes, I think it could be a combination of those different kind of participants. And I think one key thing, as we also discussed a bit last time, is that it's really key to have people with mandate to make it happen, which also relates back to the previous question again. So we're not, just in the workshop sitting and agreeing, yeah, this is a super good idea, but we actually enable it to happen. So it could be, the people that you mentioned, or those kind of roles. It could be someone within sustainability with a lot of know-how. It could be someone within strategy. It could be someone within product and tech kind of capability or departments, just to have a mixed kind of team. But then, of course, it depends a bit on the idea that you identify who is most relevant to make it happen. But I think mandate and cross-functional teams are quite key here. Anna, would you like to add something?
No, but I can also just reflect on the type of participants that we've had in the workshops before, and it's really been a wide range, everything from the CEO of companies attending the workshops and doing the exercises because that person realized that it needs to set the tone for the rest of the organization. But we've also had anything from sustainability leads to business development to sourcing. So I think here is really it is a quite fundamental training concept framework, etc. So it can be applied to any part of the business. So I wouldn't limit ourselves to say that the workshop is dedicated for a specific type of role or person.
Thanks both for that answer. So I see that we are running out of time almost. So with this, I would like to move on to the next the last agenda point. So the next session will provide with some exercises on how to take this step a bit further. So how can we help the organizations identify the potential implementation barriers, and how can we define an implementation roadmap for target the business models and the different capabilities and technologies. So until the next session, I would like you to once again have a look at these exercises that we have gone through today, and making sure that you understand how to use them and how you could bring them to other organizations. And the link will be posted in the chat again. And if any questions pop up, please bring them with you to the next session as well. And with this, I would like to round up today's session and thank you to our collaboration partners, Nordic Innovation and Citra, and big thanks to our speakers, and special thanks to you that have participated and been active in asking questions during the session. So thank you so much, and see you next week, the 8th of June, for the last webinar in this learning series.